Yes, well, it's Friday the 13th today, and I've just been to St Helier, and there's a lot of these signs around, and it's very inconvenient, but it has to be done. Roads have to be repaired, and it's something we have to put up with. But for some people, of course, it's especially tedious and inconvenient and potentially dangerous. And of course we're supposed to have a Disability Discrimination Act has just come in. Now I feel sure the guys who are doing the work of these various roads are doing their best. They're fully aware that they've got to make places accessible, but at the moment car parks can be very hazardous because you've got upstairs and downstairs routes. Lifts not recommended to be used. And of course it's not all about disability, people pushing pushchairs and trolleys, shopping baskets, all sorts of things which are made more difficult and potentially dangerous, as I say, if you can't have access. So that's the starting point about what I want to say. The Disability Discrimination Act is in place. We've got a minister, the Social Security Minister, Deputy Martin. She has a special responsibility. She's promised that the International Convention Against Disability Discrimination will be signed. She's got 2 inspectors in her department now who are supposed to go around inspecting. I don't know what they're inspecting. We've had a big report coming up about the number of inadequate rented properties that there are on the island. They're damp and dingy, but I've not heard anything about their standards of access for disabled people. How much accommodation in Jersey, private or public, is not suitable for people with disabilities or people with babies, prams and all the rest of it, all the sort of things. They ought to have lifts or ought to have better access or bigger bathrooms, all this sort of stuff. Now that's normal everyday stuff, and we've got a virus at the moment which is interfering with the best aspirations. So we're left with some pretty dismal activities, and I want to discuss those. This picture on the screen here now is Winterbourne View Care Home. Now that was supposedly looking after people with disabilities. It was just outside Bristol, and it was closed down some years ago following a panorama expose program, camera cache and all that, and it was closed down. The private company that ran it was prosecuted. Individuals went to prison, I believe, for their abuse of some of the people in there. Now something similar is happening with abuse now in care homes, intentional or otherwise, arising from the virus. There was an extraordinary programme on television yesterday which has triggered me off to think about it, because obviously it was always called the Cinderella service, looking after people with disabilities and especially mental illnesses, mental disabilities. And this discussion that they had, I think it was Channel 4, another television programme, not not politicians not exposing it, it was television, reporters doing what they should do, exposing scandals. And they shouldn't exist at all, these scandals. We all know that people in care ought to be looked after. But now with virus, it appears that a lot of people in care homes have been very neglected, and they've been abused, and all sorts of nasty things, and many of them have died. And this discussion yesterday was, to me, very perceptive, because I think there were 3 people being interviewed online, as they are now, in their separate little boxes. 2 of them were, I think, they were professionally involved in it. I think one might have been a politician. I'm not sure who they were. And they spoke, and okay, they said their bit. But the 3rd person who spoke was a young woman, with mental illness problems. She was learning difficulties, was her supposed difficulty. And she spoke with such clarity and such common sense, and she had at her fingertips, she had the figures, she had all the supportive data, And I thought she put the other two to shame. Now she's somebody with mental problems or learning difficulties, learning disabilities, she described herself as. Now, I thought, well, that's something very significant, isn't it? You've got somebody who's categorised, somebody who'd say, well, not capable of doing anything. But she was the most articulate of the three, expressing the most profound views of the three. Very, very influential. But I wonder, will she have influence? This is an article from Bailiwick Express in 2014, and it says, Jersey is way behind the UK when it comes to protecting disabled islanders. Now, one hopes that things have improved considerably since then. But over the years I've been to scrutiny, for example, I don't want to pillory the guy, he's got enough people kicking him, but I never heard, for example, Charlie Parker championing and promoting disability awareness. It wasn't one of his priorities. Yet we've heard in the last couple of years a great awareness, so we're told, of why mental health is a neglected side of the health system in Jersey, as it is everywhere. But Jersey, but there's been awareness. A lot of journalists have been talking about it, reporting on it, and how we have the need to do much more. And it wasn't even part of the new hospital plan to have a specific mental health treatment centre. Now we're told it supposedly is. But I wonder, walking around town today, I was able to walk with some difficulty, I have a few problems. How difficult is on an everyday basis for people to get do we really acknowledge disability? Now, I hope that the discussion that was on Channel 4 yesterday, where people are dying in care homes, I hope that doesn't happen in Jersey. I can't imagine it would be allowed to happen. But you wouldn't think it was happening anywhere, would you? That people are so disabled, they're needing such care, there's such a shortage of specialist carers to look after them, that they are just simply neglected. And on the basis of Winterbourne View those years ago, and how they were deliberately mistreated in that home and people were prosecuted, I do wonder what the system is here to protect them. I'm very apprehensive. And walking around town and seeing how difficult it is, even out here in public, in the open. I used a couple of public toilets today, and they're very inadequate for people with disabilities. And if you've got babies in prams, they can be very difficult. These are all aspects of life. Access. It's something I've been on about for years, but we're supposed to have a minister with special responsibility now, and 2 inspectors going around. Are we serious about it? Are we really serious about these aspects? Do we want to do anything for disabled people? Well, here's an article here on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which I say hasn't been ratified yet for Jersey, and I don't know when it will. It's Judy Martin's promised. I've got her on film promising that she will be promoting it. I don't think it's very likely in the near future. I mean, obviously, whether a COVID infection will become a category of disability, I don't know, because lots of illnesses are accepted as disabilities. So you could find in a few years' time that countries are having to account for their behaviour or neglect of people before international courts if they've failed to look after people who've suffered as a result of catching this terrible virus. But yesterday there was a minister, we heard there was an assistant minister who had a responsibility for culture, which again, as I've tried to point out, is something which is covered by a Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. It's an obligation which we already have to safeguard the culture of people, even minority groups, especially in a community, their culture has to be protected and promoted. Now, we never discussed that covenant and its obligations on Jersey. It's almost as though it didn't exist. Jersey signed up for it, but it's meaningless. And I have a horrible feeling that the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities will go the same way. We might sign it, but you see there's a reference there, look, to the optional protocol. Well, these conventions are virtually useless unless people have the ability, the facility to use them. Now, that young lady who was so impressive on the television, she had learning disabilities, as she said. She was so articulate. I mean, she was perfectly capable of being a states member or in a government or representing a community. She had all the abilities, yet she was categorised, and I was rather curious to know why she was categorised in that way. I've no idea what her particular disabilities were, but she was impressive. So we shouldn't dismiss people because they've got disabilities as being lesser, they're inferior. Their needs are just the same, but they're sometimes a bit different. They've got somewhat different. They need to be accommodated in slightly different ways, sometimes. But if you design society so it'll accommodate people with those differences, we have a much better society. Buildings would be much more accessible. And life would be much more accessible. Things would be clear. Unfortunately, one of my great failures is I can't put subtitles. I can't put written subtitles on what I'm recording now. I don't know how to do it. I've tried, I can't. I wish somebody would do it so that people who have a hearing impairment, for example, can read what I'm saying if they're interested. And lots of stuff on the Google stuff, it would be much better if we could do that all the time. I've done it and it has disappeared. But this is all part of the print. A lot of information which comes out of our government is very difficult to access. And of course now with Charlie Parker's residue system of closing down offices to the public, so much is closed, and obviously COVID is playing its part, that things are not accessible. It can be very difficult to access basic information if you have any form of disability, or even if you don't have a disability. Well, here's an international figure of the highest order. President Trump for the next few months. Now, whether he has mental capacity as we know it, I don't know. His behaviour is certainly at times irrational, but he's a world leader. So, if we're to accept the power of the ballot box, he's just lost his seat, but for the past 4 years, he's been the commander of the most powerful nation in the world, the Americas. Now, if people with his views are accepted and elected by the people, and if people have been diagnosed with a mental illness and are elected, is that wrong? Should that not be allowed? In other words, if somebody was standing for the Jersey states, the Jersey government, and known to have mental illness, would that be a barrier against, or any illness? I mean, if you've got any illness, a disability, cancer's a disability, if you are known to have a disability, should you be in government? Why shouldn't you be in government? After all, people with disabilities need to be represented. And they keep on about, oh, we need more business people in the States to represent people with priorities for business activities. Well, how about somebody who's disabled to represent people who are disabled? Now, of course, we did have a candidate in the last elections who narrowly missed becoming a senator, I think it was. And now he has been appointed as an inspector in the Social Security Department on disability issues. But it's not quite the same. I mean, it's a shame he hadn't been elected as a representative on specifically. He wasn't standing specifically on disability, but he was a noticeably disabled person. And it would have been so refreshing to my way of thinking if he'd got elected. He just missed it. Now, I don't know whether Mr. Trump has been refreshing. He's certainly been very challenging. And I think that's what we need. We need lots of these status quo issues to be challenged. And I I hope who is doing the challenge doesn't have his finger on the nuclear button, but that goes with the job. So I do pose the question, is there any limit, really, to be imposed upon people with mental illness? I mean, or any illness, like the people who are being allowed to die by neglect in nursing homes in the UK because they have severe disabilities. Now that's obviously not acceptable, but who actually speaks for them? Who's promoting them, and who speaks for them in Jersey? I am concerned. Walking around town, if the signs are there, if you care to see them, when you see a road closed, pavement closed sign, lift closed, stairs out of operation, when you see those signs, you must think it may affect you, it may be a nuisance for you, but for some people that's a huge barrier.